The dragon had been following the scent for 4 provinces, and the scent was bread. I know how that sounds. Hold it a moment, and let me tell you about the dragon, because the whole story lives inside this one strangeness. The dragon was the Emperor Darius, and he was 38 years old, and for 2 years, since the death of the last person who remembered him as anything but a throne, he had been going up in dragon form on the long evenings, and flying nowhere, in wide, joyless, weatherless circles, the way a man paces a house after a funeral. The court physicians had a careful phrase for it. The flight master, who was old and had no career left to protect, had a plainer one. The emperor is looking for something, and he does not know what it is, and neither do I, and it is not in the sky. But the sky is where he looks for it. He was the son of the Empress Corvina, who had ruled 40 years like winter rules a mountain, magnificently, unarguably, and without a single warm afternoon. What warmth young Darius had found in the frozen machinery of her palace had come, all of it, from one place, the third kitchen, the small one, the one that existed because an empress must eat, even when she will not dine, and specifically, from the third kitchen's underbaker, a broad-handed southern woman named Petra Milne. Are you paying attention to that name? The story pays it back. For 9 years, between the ages of 4 and 13, between one tutor's death and another's arrival, the heir of the 9 provinces had escaped his schedule almost daily by a route involving 2 laundries and a coal chute, and had sat on a flour barrel in the third kitchen, and had been fed, not banqueted, fed, heel crusts with honey, failed loaves, which he was solemnly informed it was his imperial duty to make disappear. And above all, on the good days, the bread she called hearth bread, a dark, dense, seeded southern loaf, baked from a recipe she guarded with theatrical ferocity in a handwritten book of measures, a recipe she would tell no one whole, and of which she used to say, flowering his hair with one broad hand, "This one is not for the palace, little majesty. This one is from home. This one I am saving for my daughter, when I have her." When he was 13, the empress reorganized the household, the way winter reorganizes a garden. The third kitchen was found inefficient and closed. Petra Milne was paid out and gone south before he was told, and the heir of 9 provinces stood in the cold new efficiency where the ovens had been, and did not cry, because by 13 the training had taken and he had stopped knowing how. He never found her. Understand that he could have, later, crowned. He had clerks enough to find one baker in an empire, and he never let them look. And if you have ever guarded a wound by refusing to know its edges, you understand him. The kitchen went where lost warm things go. He ruled. His mother died. The circles in the evening sky began. And then, on an ordinary flight over an unimportant province on the first cold evening of autumn, at 4,000 feet, the wind brought him, impossibly, unmistakably, out of the whole scent map of the world below, one thread of dark, dense, seeded southern hearth bread, and the emperor of 9 provinces went around in the sky like a compass needle finding north. Dragons file memories by scent. You know this by now. These stories have taught you. What you must add tonight is its terrible corollary. A scent is a key that opens the room where the memory lives. All of it. At once. Unbargained with. The flour barrel, the honey, the broad hand in his hair, little majesty, and the Emperor Darius. 2 years circling and not knowing what for, knew in one breath exactly what he had been looking for, and followed the thread down through 4,000 feet of evening, losing it, finding it, quartering the darkening country like a hound, night after night, province after province, in what the flight master's log recorded simply as, "The Emperor is hunting. Object unknown. He will not come down." The thread ran out in a river valley, in a small town called Harrowmere, at mid-morning, at a bakery on the market square. Market day in Harrowmere, mid-morning, first cold week of autumn. 400 people in the square, apples on the stalls, geese complaining, the week's gossip changing hands at the well, and then a shadow crossed the square the size of the square, and the world ended, the way it does in small towns, locally and completely. The dragon came down out of the low autumn sun with a wingspan that unroofed the market of its light, and it landed in the center of everything, scattering stalls with the wind of it, geese detonating in all directions. Vast, black, absolute, its folded wings crowding the shopfronts on both sides, and Harrowmere, which had never in its recorded history been visited by anything larger than a tax assessor, achieved in 11 seconds the most complete evacuation in the annals of the province. They ran everywhere and anywhere, into cellars, into the church, into other people's houses, upstream along the river with the geese. The miller's cart was abandoned mid-square, with the mule still in the traces. The mule, tell it in fairness, kept its head, having no imagination, and inside of a minute, the market square of Harrowmere held one dragon, one philosophical mule, a great deal of scattered fruit, and silence, and one lit window. The bakery stood on the square's north side, and its window glowed the way bakery windows glow on cold mornings, and from inside it came, audible now in the enormous silence, the entirely ordinary sounds of someone working, the scrape of a peel on an oven floor, the thump of turned-out loaves, a woman's voice, alone, half humming something with no particular tune. The dragon's head, which was the size of the mayor's parlor, came around toward the window and stopped. Inside the bakery, Petra Milne heard the screaming stop, which was somehow worse than the screaming, and looked up from her ovens, and found her entire view of the market square occupied by an eye. Let me tell you about Petra Milne, and let me tell you honestly, because her part in this story gets sung as fearlessness, and it was never fearlessness. She was 30 years old. She had her mother's broad hands, her mother's bakery, her mother's book of measures, and, for 5 years now, since the fever took Isolde, her mother's absence, which she carried the way you carry weather. She had never left Harrowmere. The town found this odd in a woman whose mother had come from away, from the south, from— Isolde had always been vague, in a fortified way, from service. Petra had stopped being curious about the vagueness at exactly the age when her mother, dying, had put the book of measures into her hands and said the strangest of her strange sentences, the hearthbread, Petra. Whatever else, keep the hearthbread Fridays. You never know who is passing. It was Friday. The hearthbread, dark, dense, seeded, its scent going up the chimney like a signal since before dawn, was in the oven. 4 loaves in, 6 proofing, and the timing of bread is a tyranny that does not recognize emergencies. The 4 in the oven had 9 minutes, and 9 minutes is 9 minutes. So when the light died and the square emptied and the eye arrived at her window, an eye the size of her door, amber, unblinking, fixed on her with an attention total enough to have a temperature, Petra Milne did the arithmetic of her situation with her mother's practicality, and the arithmetic came out like this. If it wants me, the door is no argument, and running will only mean dying tired. And the loaves have 9 minutes. Well, she said to the eye, out loud, because talking to herself was the family failing, you are not a customer I have had before. And she kept baking. That is the fact of it, the fact the ballads got right. She turned back to her work, turned her back, though her hands, be it noted, were not entirely steady, and she floured them twice to hide it from herself, and she worked the peel, and turned the proofing cloths, and the humming, when she managed to restart it, was her mother's no tune, and the window kept glowing, and the scrape and thump of an ordinary Friday went on inside it. Outside, the dragon watched the woman not run. And if you have followed these stories, you know what the town could not. That the creature at the window had spent 2 years being fled from politely in his own palace. Every kindness a transaction, every face a mirror of his rank, and had now crossed 4 provinces, hunting a dead scent, and had found at the end of the thread a lit window with his childhood coming out of the chimney, and behind the glass, broad-handed, flower to the elbows, humming, a woman who upon meeting his eye had assessed him, the black terror of 9 skies, as a scheduling problem. The dragon sat down in the market square to wait. It sat the way cats sit at mouse holes, with the folded completeness of the very patient, its tail curling around the abandoned miller's cart, its eye at the window, and the mule, after some reflection, went back to sleep. 9 minutes later, in the sight of 100 faces at shutters and cellar grates all around the square, the bakery door opened and Petra Milne came out. She came out carrying The shutters could not believe it. The church, watching through its keyhole, forgot to pray. A loaf of hearthbread on a wooden peel, held out before her like a small dark offering, still ticking with heat. "I will tell you how it is," she said to the dragon, and her voice went out over the silent square, steady in the way of a voice being held steady on purpose. "My mother said the hearthbread bakes Fridays, because you never know who is passing. 25 years I have watched that superstition eat good flour. And here you are, passing." She set the loaf down on the boards of the miller's cart, stepped back one step, and put her floured hands on her hips. "So it will be yours, I suppose. But I will need the square eventually, and the geese will want their dignity back. Eat and be on your way." The dragon looked at the loaf. What happened next was seen by 100 witnesses and is told 100 ways. But the mule was closest, and I hold with the mule's version. The great head came down slowly, past the loaf, ignoring the loaf, and stopped level with the woman, close enough that her apron moved with its breath, and the amber eye searched her face the way you search a room you used to live in. The broad hands, the no-tune hum still hanging about her, the set of the chin. "Milne," said the sign over the door, in fresh-painted letters, "E.S.T., Isolde, kept by her daughter. Her daughter. This one I am saving for my daughter, when I have her." The dragon that was the emperor of 9 provinces looked at the daughter of Isolde Milne, standing in flower and morning light, with her mother's whole gift alive in her hands, and her mother's grave 5 years old, on the hill above the town. He could read all of it. The scent map hid nothing. The bread and the grief and the courage laid over the fear like glaze, and the eye closed, and the vast head bowed, down and down, until the black brow came to rest, with the weight of a folded blanket, against the boards of the cart beside the loaf. It did not eat. It laid its head down by the bread, and it stayed there, and the sound it made was low and enormous, and had nothing of threat in it at all. And Petra Milne, who did not yet understand one true thing about her mourning, understood the way women of her line understood things. By the hands, that the monster in her market square was not hungry. It was home. The children came back first, as children do. By the second afternoon, there was a row of them along the churchyard wall, ranked by daring, watching the dragon watch the bakery, and the boldest of them, the cooper's girl, 7, destined for great things, walked the whole green, alone, and stood in front of the folded mountain of him, with her fists on her hips, exactly as she had seen the baker do, and informed him, "You ate Petra's Friday bread. That's the good one." The dragon regarded her gravely. It bowed its head a fraction, in what the whole wall unanimously reported as an apology. From that hour, Harrowmere's terror had a leak in it that could not be mended, and by the time the outriders came, the town had already, in its heart, taken sides. And its side, forever after, was the dragon's. It stayed 3 days, and Harrowmere learned to live around it, because Harrowmere had harvests to get in, and the dragon, it emerged, had the manners of a paying guest. It moved off the square proper by the first evening, to the green by the well, where it fit, and it disturbed nothing further, and it waited. There was no mistaking the waiting for anything else. It waited facing the bakery. When the ovens lit before dawn, the amber eyes opened. When Petra crossed the square on errands, the head tracked her with the frank, unembarrassed attention of a lighthouse. The town, watching from a distance that shrank daily, worked through terror into bafflement into, "This is small towns. 3 days is a long time in one," proprietary pride. Other towns had fairs. Harrowmere had a dragon, and their baker was, in some manner not yet formalized, its business. She fed it. It would take bread from no hand but hers. This was established when the blacksmith, brave with cider, left it a tribute loaf from the second bakery, and the dragon looked at the loaf, and then at the blacksmith with the courteous non-recognition of a duke, past a forged invitation. But each morning Petra brought the hearthbread out to the green, one dark loaf on the wooden peel, and set it down, and each morning the dragon ate it, slowly, with its eyes closed, in the manner of a creature not eating but remembering, and each morning she stayed a little longer afterward, hands on hips studying it. Because Petra Milne was doing sums of her own, and they would not come out. On the second evening she went up the hill to her mother's grave with a candle lantern, as she did on hard-thinking nights, and sat on the wall and talked it through, the family failing. "It is not a wild thing," she told the headstone. "It has been in service. It waits like something that once had a bell to answer. It will not eat, but from me. It eats nothing but yours, and it eats it like church." And it looked at me. The first morning. She stopped, working her hands into her apron. "It looked at me the way old Widow Corse looked at me the year after you went. Like it knew you. Like it was checking your face against mine and finding you." The candle fluttered. The valley lay dark below with one great shape breathing by the well. "Who passed through your kitchen, Mother? Who exactly were you saving that bread for, all those Fridays? You and your you never know who is passing." The headstone kept its counsel. Her mother had kept it too. On the third evening, the answer came up the valley road with outriders and lathered horses, and the crest of the 9 provinces on its panniers. The imperial flightmaster, 60 years in service, grim as debt, who took one look across the green at the shape by the well and aged backward with relief in the sight of the whole town. And Petra, standing in her doorway with flour on her hands, watched the most senior soldier anyone in Harrowmere had ever seen walk not toward the dragon, but toward her, and remove his helmet, and bow. "Mistress," said the flightmaster, "I am going to ask you a question, and I have ridden 4 provinces to ask it, and I beg you to answer it plainly. Where did your mother learn her bread?" They sat in the bakery, the flightmaster and the baker, with the book of measures between them on the flour-dusted table, and outside the window the shape by the well arranged itself so that its eye kept the lamplit glass in view. "Petra Milne," the old soldier said, turning the pages with enormous care, "served 9 years in the 3rd kitchen of the Jade Palace, under the Empress Corvina. The palace has been looking for the trace of her since—" He hesitated, soldier's caution, and then plainly gave it up as beneath the occasion. "I will tell you the whole of it. It is not the palace looking, it is him." And he told her. The frozen court, and the warm kitchen, the coal chute, the flour barrel, the heel crusts and the failed loaves, it had been an imperial duty to make disappear. The Empress's reorganization, the closed kitchen, the boy of 13 standing in the cold efficiency where the ovens had been. Petra listened with her hands flat on the table, and at a certain point, the flowering of the hair, little majesty, she turned her face away to the window, and the great waiting eye beyond it, and did not turn it back until she had command of it. "That is the emperor," she said. "On my green, by my well, 3 days eating my bread with his eyes shut. That is the emperor," the flightmaster agreed. 2 years the court has watched him circle the evenings like a ghost, and none of us could name what he was hunting, himself least of all. Then one night over the eastern hills the wind brought him something, and he went off the map. The old man's voice did a thing it had not done in 40 years of dispatches. "I have known him since he was 4, mistress. I taught him falconry. His mother required it be joyless, and we failed her together twice a week. In all that palace there was one room where anyone was kind to that child for free. Your mother never knew what she was worth." Or, he touched the book's cover, where Isolde's careful stitching still held it square. Or she knew exactly, and kept it, the way she kept everything, in measures. Petra drew the book to her, and opened it at the last written page, the one she had never baked from because it stopped mid-line, her mother's strong hand faltering with the fever, an ingredient list half finished, a title at the top and then whiteness. She turned it toward the flightmaster. The title said, "For the little majesty, if he is ever passing." The old soldier looked at that line for a long moment, and then he stood, and went to the window, and signaled through the glass to his emperor, "Found." The dragon became a man at first light on the 4th day, in the empty market square, with the whole town at the shutters and no one breathing. Petra came out to him as she had come out the first morning, through the bakery door, carrying bread. He stood by the miller's cart in plain travel clothes, tall, gray-eyed, 38, with 2 years of circling, and 4 provinces of hunting, and 25 years of a closed kitchen in his face, and she recognized him from the coin, and found the coin had lied. It gave him his mother's jaw, and none of the flour barrel boy the flightmaster had ridden 4 provinces describing. "Majesty," said Petra Milne, and did not bow, because her hands were full, and because some part of her, her mother's part, had assessed the situation and ruled that what this man needed walking toward him across a market square, this morning, of all the mornings of his reign, was not one more bent neck. "She called me that," he said, his first human words in 4 provinces. His voice was rusty with the wing. "Little Majesty, I have never heard it since without—" And then he stopped, because Petra had reached the cart, and set down the peel, and what stood ticking on the boards between them was not the hearth bread. It was the last page. She had been up since midnight with the book of measures and her mother's faltering half-line, and she had done the thing bakers of her line did in place of weeping. She had finished the recipe, guessed her way down the whiteness measure by measure, her mother's logic in her hands where it had always lived, and baked, at first light, for the first time in the history of the world, the loaf Petra Milne had been composing for the flour barrel boy when the fever took her pen. "She left it unfinished," Petra said. "Page says it was for you. I have finished it, on my own judgment, which she trained. So you will tell me if I have got it wrong, but I will warn you first." And her voice, which had held steady in front of a dragon the size of the square, did not entirely hold now. "I do not think either of us believes I have got it wrong." The Emperor of 9 provinces broke bread in the market square of Harrowmere, with the flour still on the crust warming his hands, and ate, and it was not wrong. It was the 3rd kitchen. It was the flour barrel, and the honey light, and the broad hand in his hair, and everything the coal chute had ever led down to, alive and finished and handed to him across a cart by a woman with her mother's hands, and Darius, first of that name, who had stopped knowing how at 13, stood in front of 100 shutters and wept. And Petra Milne, who knew exactly what to do with weeping, her trade dealt in it daily, bread and funerals are old colleagues, came around the cart and stood beside him, and put one floured, broad, entirely unauthorized hand on the imperial shoulder, and said the thing her mother used to say over the failed loaves. "There now, it came out better than it went in. That is all we ask of an oven." He did not leave. That is the scandal and the whole rest of the story. The empire's business relocated itself, piece by piece and against every precedent, to a river valley in an unimportant province, because the emperor had discovered that he could not, having found it, leave the window lit. Formally, it was a progress. The court invented reasons the way courts do. In fact, for one autumn, the 9 provinces were governed from the upper room of the Harrowmere Inn, and every morning, early, before the clerks and the couriers got at him, the emperor of everything walked across the market square to the bakery, and sat on a flour barrel. She found him a flour barrel. It was among her first acts of state, and was fed. Heel crusts with honey. Failed loaves, solemnly assigned. And they talked, the way she had talked to the headstone, and he had talked to no one at all, about Isolde, mostly, at first, trading her back and forth, his 9 years for Petra's 25, each of them owning chapters the other had never read, and then, as the autumn went on, about everything a frozen palace and a small town could between them hold. The court despaired. The flightmaster smiled into his beard. The town of Harrowmere, proprietary from the first, considered the whole match its own arrangement, and has never since been talked out of it. He asked her at midwinter, on the green, by the well, with frost on the world and the ovens breathing gold behind her, and he asked it in the 3rd kitchen's language, because it was the only language his best self had ever been taught. "I spent 2 years circling the sky, and did not know what for. It was never the bread, Petra. The bread was the thread. It was the kitchen. It was the one room where the door was open for free. You are the room. You have been the room since the morning you came out that door with your hands full, and refused to bow. Marry me. I am asking with nothing in my hands. I have checked them." He held them up, palms out, a man displaying honest emptiness. "And everything I have is somewhat frozen, and needs a warm room very badly." Mother had a saying pinned over the ovens, Petra said, when she could say things. A southern writer, Radmacher, "Courage does not always roar." Sometimes courage is the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, "I will try again tomorrow." She took his upturned empty hands in her floured ones and turned them over, inspecting them, the way she candled eggs, thoroughly. and against the light. She kept the hearthbread going every Friday of my life on the strength of that sentence. 25 years of tomorrows, waiting for whoever was passing. Turns out it was you. She looked up. Yes, on conditions. The ovens come with me. The square keeps its market. And on Fridays, Majesty. Every Friday, wherever we are, whatever the Empire thinks it needs, we bake. The Empire learned to arrange itself around Fridays. It is in the household ordinances to this day, the strangest clause in 9 provinces. The imperial kitchens keep one small room, third along the east passage, with a flour barrel by the window, and no servant enters it on Fridays, because on Fridays, the Empress bakes hearthbread with her own hands, dark and dense and seated, and the Emperor of the 9 provinces sits on the barrel and disposes, solemnly, of the failed loaves, of which, the kitchen clerks record with some puzzlement, there is always at least one, however flawless the batch appears to them at the window. The clerks are young. They will learn. Some loaves are failed on purpose, for love, because a boy on a barrel must have his duty. And some doors are kept open for free for 25 years, on faith, for whoever is passing. And some courage never roars at all. It just lights the ovens before dawn, and keeps the window glowing while the whole world runs, and says, to the enormous dark arriving in the square outside, you are not a customer I have had before, but the bread has 9 minutes, and I am not going anywhere. She kept baking. It waited. It is waiting there still, in every telling. The great head at the lit window, the flower-white hands refusing to shake, the moment the whole empire knows by heart, the morning the loneliest creature in 9 provinces followed the last warm thread of its childhood, 4 provinces upwind, and found, at the end of it, glowing in an emptied square, the one door in the world that did not close.